Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here, and I would like to explain the reason for the double act. Started over 20 years ago with our colleague from the University of Genoa, the late Nicoletta Morello, who was working on Arturo Issel. She was preparing his biography for the Italian National Dictionary of Biography. And she realized that very little had been done on this figure of Issel. So she invited me to collaborate with her and to look at the archives in the University of Genoa and at the museum in Genoa from the point of view of paleontology and geology done by Issel. She also involved Ezio for instructions for travelers. Explain this part in the second part of our talk. So I will give an overview of Issel and his career and his importance within Italian geology and paleontology. Issel was born in Genoa. He did his geology degree at the University of Pisa with the renowned figure of Giuseppe Meneghini. He got his degree in 1863, and he was immediately given a position at the University of Genoa. Now, one of his first publications is from 1864 on the ossiferous caverns in Liguria and in Malta. He had a second publication in 1865. He was also a renowned traveler, one of the founders of the Geographical Society in Italy. And I will give an overview through his career on the different parts of his interests and how he was involved with many aspects in Italy. In 1866, he was appointed, he got his junior professorship in mineralogy and geology, and he was soon promoted to full professor of geology. He was one of the elite group from the society in Genoa. One of his great friends was Giacomo Doria, who was the founder of the Natural History Museum in Genoa. And they were traveling friends. They undertook a variety of voyages, particularly in the exploration of the coast of Africa. And they were, they brought back from these voyages collections for the museum itself. They were founding members, as I said, of the Italian Geographical Society, which was established in 1867. Now, Issel, as a traveler, he has three main voyages. One, 1865, which was the exploration of the coast of the Red Sea. 1870, again in the Red Sea, Eritrea, and the Ethiopian highlands. In 1876, a more extensive voyage to the coast of Africa, the Galita Islands, and Tunisia. And these were published in a variety of essays afterwards. This is the one from 1865 on the Red Sea. And Issel, when he was on this voyage, he was present as a delegate for Italy for the opening of the Suez Canal. So he was there also in an official capacity to witness this event. He was a keen observer, and his main talent was also his sketches, his collections, and his recording of what he saw in the field. This is an aspect of his work. He was a great and renowned field geologist, renowned for his energy, even up until the year of his death. He was always noted for this ability of not giving up on the last mile. and getting to where he wanted to go. He worked in a variety of disciplines, which led, of course, to a variety of rich publications throughout his career. Here we see his map that he drafted himself for the coast of the Red Sea and his first voyage in 1865. The second voyage was undertaken with two other noted travelers at the time, Antinori and Vaccari. And this voyage was taken again within the Red Sea, where Issel was charged with description of the mollusks from this area. And he has a famous volume published on the mollusca of the Red Sea. This was financed by the Geographical Society. And when he returned, he brought back, of course, collections also for the museum in Genoa. The first was this diary published by him. And the second publication from this travel was published 30 years later, where he gave an outline of the paleogeography of the area. In hindsight, with his experience of a 30-year career of teaching and fieldwork. The third voyage was again in 1876. This was published in 1877, and here we see a nice photo of this group of naturalists from Genoa, with Issel standing on the back on the left, Giacomo Doria, Gestro, and Albertis, who were famous members of the Geographical Society in Italy. This is one of his essays, one of the publications that came from the voyage. Issel, the traveler, he was involved very much with the governments and council in the city of Genoa. And he was in contact with many people from the military, people who were doing surveys, people who were undertaking also voyages for the Geographical Society. So he was asked to edit a volume of instructions for travelers, how to prepare their specimens that they collected, how to send them, how to, actually we'll tell you more about this. But this volume was published in 1881. And Issel was the editor and the compiler, but he also had a chapter himself within this volume. He specifically wrote on collecting specimens for geology and paleontology and for the Natural History Museum. Issel, his achievements in geology, he was a noted professor of geology and mineralogy. He continued to teach until 1917, so he was well into his 70s. He was celebrated at the University of Genoa, 40 years of teaching, with an event where many of his colleagues from around Italy gave presentations in his honor. On this occasion, they also founded a foundation for students in his honor to represent his teaching and what he had contributed to Italian geology through his teaching and through the students from his university that also became renowned figures within Italian geology. Another one of his volumes is the Geologia and Prehistoria of Liguria, reflecting his fieldwork in Liguria, which is the region of around Genoa. This was a 2-volume memoir published in 1892. He is also noted for his introduction of the term in geology of bradisimo, which regards the uplift of land, the slow uplift, the slow oscillation of land in relation to volcanism. This was published in 1883. Issel, within the University of Genoa, he was a great promoter of science. He was a member of the Council of the City of Genoa. He was a reference for anything to do with geology or paleontology within the region of Liguria. He also established many societies for the popularization of science and different magazines related to these sciences. He also established a geological and paleontological museum within the university for amateurs and for students. He particularly emphasized this role of promotion and popularization of science. He also set up a course for teachers to introduce them to geology and paleontology, which was run within the University of Genoa itself. He is also known for his establishment of the Tyrrhenian stage in stratigraphy. He followed very much the work of Maurice Guénot in France and his publications in 1910 and 1912 of the Mediterranean area. And Issel received from a co-worker in Sardegna a collection of fossils which he realized had a significance for one of the stages within the Pleistocene. And this he published in 1914, that was presented at the Royal Academy of the Lincei. And this stage of the Pleistocene still exists today as one of the marine stages for the Mediterranean area, which underlines Issel's precision and his knowledge of the Mediterranean area and of the Pleistocene. He followed very much the international debate on the Pleistocene. He was an international delegate for Italy. He always attended the geological congresses as part of the Italian delegation for stratigraphy. His publications, he had more than 250 publications, the last dating from 1921, just a year before he died, Cenni di ornamenta sistematica della stimata geologica, which is about what he refers to as the wounds on the surface of the earth, how the earth has been injured. For example, he mentions meteorite impacts, the effect of rainwater on the topography and the terrain, which leads us also to his work in caves. He established a memoir series for geology and paleontology and mineralogy in Liguria in 1876. And he worked on a vast range of topics, from geology to paleontology, paleoethnology to scientific surveys and travels. There are 2 or 3 extensive biographies that were written by his colleagues at the time. One, most famous one, by Federico Sacco in 1923. He was an international figure. He was a member of 37 national and foreign scientific academies and societies, including the French Committee on Human Paleontology, and a foreign member of the Society of Anthropology in Paris. He obtained many awards, many medals from the King of Italy for his work. Just 2 quotations from 2 of his biographies, one by Sacco, who states that he is a man of science, both dignified and noble, whose vast, profound, and multiple knowledge, together with his willingness for hard work and great modesty, was admired by all who knew him. And his provost from the university, who compares him to such figures as Leonardo and Alberti, Arduino, and Lazzaro Mori. Now, I will hand.
Now, the problem with such an eclectic figure like Issel is to select publications and material for an examination like we would like to do in the second part of this talk. and on the topic that we put in the title, human paleontology and especially cave explorations. So we decided to focus not in the main and more known work, which is the Liguria Geologica Prehistorica, the big 2 volumes final work he did, or the Liguria Prehistorica in 1988, but to look to some minor material, which has been quite forgotten. We must say also that Issel has not yet a real monograph as he deserves, a real monograph about his life, but especially about his incredible wide scientific production. It's another example of this eclectism, which in the Italian sciences continues until nearly the end of the century. So we don't find a real specialized figure here, as you have clearly seen from first part of presentation by Kathleen. So you see here on the right, yes, you see the selection of his first publications. And the very first publication, and we have highlighted the one related to the main interest of this conference. So the exploration of caves, looking for fossils remains, and in particular for human fossil remains, but also human tools. So it's a kind of work between what Claudine rightly said this morning, disciplines like human paleontology, but also prehistoric archaeology. And paleontology was also used in these years in his work. The very first of his interest is certainly in cave exploration, in fossil bones, which could be found quite easily also by amateurs in this region of northwest Italy, which is Liguria. Capital is Genoa on the sea, but we have a series of other cities like Savona, for example, which is quite interesting for this topic. So this interest in caves and human remains was actually a constant topic, which followed all Issel production. We find this first page of the list of his publication from the obituary by Federico Sacco, but you can imagine the rest of the pages with the similar red marks, because in every year, apart from very few moments of pause due to his didactical teaching duties, he was interested and he was going to see caves and fossil remains of this kind. So even before he got the position as a professor of geology in Genova, he was already interested in 1864 and 65 in this kind of material. And he was very young. We must remember that in 1864, this brilliant scholar was only 22 years of age. He was very young. We must remember him more with the young picture that we have seen at the beginning than with the long beard at the end when he was old and actually was making a sort of summary of what he was. The iconic figure is the young man, not the old man with the beard, in Darwinian style, which doesn't mean very much at the end, at that stage. Discovery of several animal bones, but also tools, human remains, without being a real archaeologist or an expert in all these tools. But we see how we manage, even without being a specialist. Importance of systematic research, importance in methodology. That's what I want to stress in this part of the talk. Method for exploring, for observing, for collecting, and for describing. Issel was also an enthusiast supporter of this new trend of these new sciences described well this morning. So he supported, for example, the project by Edouard Ezio, Gilles de Mortillet, Giovanni Capellini, about a series of international meetings, which started in La Spezia in 1865 and went on, and he went to Paris in 1867. In fact, one of his first publications is about a summary he did in this occasion. This is his very first publication. It's about an ossiferous cavern in Finale. It turned out to be the very well-known cave of Arene Candide in Finale, Ligure, in the Liguria region. He was then explored in other years by Issel. He published in the Atti della Società Italiana di Scienze Naturali, the Society of the Naturalists, of Italian Naturalists, which had started in 1860. So he was in the debate with other naturalists, and he noted very young Issel 1864, the presence of human remains, avanzi umani, mixed with other bones, and immediately considered, for a series of reasons, of the same age, the contemporaneity of the datation. With dating, he will have very careful. He will be very careful with dating. He will be more interested in geology used for understanding the detailed description of material. For example, location, where the material is being found, conditions, and morphology. But, for example, in this case, he ends the paper saying very carefully that it may be material from the early Bronze Age. But there are too many alterations by fire and a series of other problems that he finds in this case. Another paper written a few months after, during his travel to Malta, is this published in France. Published in the periodical Matériaux pour l'histoire de l'homme, 1865, and is interesting because he doesn't talk very much about human remains in the caves, but he talks about the human fossils that he had seen in the museum at La Valette. So collection that he compared to what he has seen, tools and objects in the field. Then there is this Congress I mentioned before in 1867 in Paris, the Congress of Anthropology, Archaeology, and Prehistoric Archaeology, the second Congress of this after La Spezia, where he make a real report, a summary of what he has been done in these years, from 1868 earlier. And we discovered that he went to many caves. He didn't publish a report from every cave he went. He just decided to put a final summary in this occasion. Fossili humaine, and then a series of other caves like Varese, Mentone, Finale, Ligure, Toirano. There is also a place which is not a cave, it's called del Vento. And description, iconography will be quite reduced in Issel writings until the big book of 1892 and 1908, where he will use more iconography material. You can see some material. What he was interested, you can see a part of a jaw, of a human jaw, and a few tools, you know, as we can see quite often in publication of this kind. What he was interested is also to stress the difference between specimens collected by amateurs and specimens collected by scientists like him. It's interesting also this fact. This morning there was a question about how the amateurs were regarded in France, and in Italy the amateurs were actually, at least by Issel, respected very much within his own work. So we can say that he was trying to make a network between scientists and amateurs and collectors, and also local people. In 1868, there is a report of some significant findings of fossil human bones near Savona in Liguria, but we don't have caves here. We have an excavation for buildings, for a religious building, for a church, and the local priest collected the material found on the foundation. And it became a case because they found a series of remains which were considered of interest also by Issel, 3 meters deep. He thought it was not a recent burial. And then again, other things like color and reaction to calcination and other features that he made them think that he was very old material. And there were also other fossils, perfectly preserved, older fossils that he could date. In this way, there is a chosen man considered something no more existing in modern age, of a specimen which didn't look like a man of a modern age, but it could only be a man. They have a discussion point in the Society of Natural History in Milan with the Stoppani, much older than him and more distinguished, who didn't believe in the conclusion of this young colleague about the contemporaneity of this fossil material from invertebrates and human remains, as he was trying to support. In the 70s, we have a series of other material, of other publications. I'm trying to go a bit faster now. Published in France, for example, in this periodical, funded by Gilbert de Motier, where Issel gives a sort of summary again of the recent discoveries in Liguria. And here is probably the publication which we consider more interesting because It's very little known. It's a little booklet. It was published in within a periodical very little known as well, which is the ephemeride of the Society of Lectures, Conferences, let's say, and scientific conversations in Genova, which means practically a group of people who are trying to give popular science, a very simple science, explained to the general public in Genova. With the help of the university, Issel was a professor who was actually interested in this. In this little society, several things happened, including the strange volcanic experiment of Paolo Gorini, several things which made science a bit spectacular as well. But Issel was focused on the need to regulate the work of the collectors in order to preserve the places which had been discovered, so many caves at the end of the 19th century in Liguria. So with the idea to save the place for a bad use, for damaging and even robbery. And on the other hand, he wanted to instruct these people in order to become part of his network. So it was not just make popular science or spectacular science, it was make useful science. And he did also for another group of people he was very much fond of, who were the members of the Alpine Club. Because Issel, as other geologists and crystallographers, like, for example, Quintino Sella, was one of the founders of the Italian Alpine Club in 1863. And he produced a series of instructions for alpinists on the mountain. So in this little booklet, we find, yes, the need to regulate the cave exploration by amateurs, instruction for excavating and collecting fossil bones, but also together with any object which is a trace of activity of man. So every tool which can be of interest for archaeologists, of course. And then this idea of popular science related to the principle of the early principles of conservation of a site. And then he did also another thing. He presented a survey with the preliminary census of the ossiferous caves in Liguria. He made the table, name, dimension of cavities, location and host terrain, objects collected and observed in that place, names of explorers. Here we see an example where he say the scientific method has to be used against every risk of damage. The caves are interesting for an explorer like him if they have free access, enough light and air, presence of sediments and or concretions. It's important to make a small ditch as a sample to check the different depth of the findings because they can be related to different archaeological and geological periods. So, and then take note and make a label of each specimen in place in the field, make the name of the cave, the internal location, the depth of the rock strata where the bone is found. So a series of instructions very clear. And concerning the problem of extracting fossils, you say, if there is a skeleton in particular, human remains, extract the fossil with his own slab, with his own bedrock, don't use any explosive. Now, the fact that he say don't use any explosive is because certainly people were using already explosive in the caves. Like now, unfortunately, in the Alps, the collectors of minerals are doing sometimes illegally, not of course, but it's a problem. It was already in the 19th century, this situation. He says, no, you can use a little amount of explosive very carefully for breaking the beds of concretions, stalagmite and so on, if they don't have fossils. So now we don't agree very much with this, of course, use, but at the time he was thinking that was the less damaging way, no, to use the explosive. It's interesting here because you can see that he's quoting Les Ezis, is quoting the region and the cave of the Ezis because here, at that time, he had already collected information. The material was extracted in the proper way. And also very important to move the fossils from a very closed human environment to a dry open air. People don't think about that, in particular amateurs. So it was another warning of the risk of this operation. And then, as in the tradition of these booklets for instructions, you find a series of things, of tools that you need for going to travel. The compass, like the one of mineralogist, the lantern for the light with the candles. You need a rope because you can go down like a speleologist sometime, no? You need several other things, like for example, there is, of course, maps, peaks, hammer, even the little explosive, and then you find the little glass tools for putting in some kind of material, maybe then you're going to use in the microscope, little boxes. There is a piece of brass net, which is used about 1 meter square on surface, which is used for filtering material, like in gold search, you know, sort of like they're trying to see clearly what it was the composition of the sand. And finally, also bring a new clothes to change after you come out from the cave, which is not absolutely something secondary, as people who go in the caves know well. So all these things, very important. Together, other indication: brush the fossil, not wash it. Take note of the orientation and position of the skeletons, of the bones. See if there is a presence of other objects or tools. Take a sample of ground below the remains, whatever is made, and keep a notebook where systematically you have to record all the observation and the actions. Bring the specimens collected. When you have finished to collect, be checked to from a scientist, and not bring it home and make a private collection that can be quite dangerous. So carry instruments, carry all this material that is being listed here with you. You can also make some zoological observation, he says at the end, because the animals living in cavern can be interesting people. Very quickly, this is the table where you can see this list of caves that he has, and there is very little geology. That's another aspect which is noticeable. Every so often he says, yes, this maybe is a Cretaceous limestone surrounding the area, but they are more geographical, the information that he gives in this table, and about the various explorers who did a search in these caves, and about the findings, oggetti raccolti. In his late papers, he was more active in producing sketches of caves, images of the remains, and also tables like that, which collects the full amount of material which had been found by him in the last 20 years or 30 years of work. In the case of the Finale Ligure, he was already an expert of this cave. As I told you, he worked in the Alpine Club as authors of instruction for alpinists. I have not found yet an instruction for alpinists in this journal about fossil caves, but there is, for example, this one about the mineralogy. So you bring with you a kit for making mineralogical observation in the mountains at high quote. So you see the idea of mountain club in these years, 1884, was not the idea of climbing for reaching the peak, for doing sport. It was for knowing, for knowledge, for doing science. Because Issel was explaining how to make mineralogical testing of whatever you found on your walk. And finally, we can say that this man certainly was an eclectic polymath of the late 19th century, early 20th century. He had a strong interdisciplinary attitude. He had a strong emphasis of methodology, as I tried to explain, even if that was a secondary publication or considered secondary publication. And he had an inclusive approach in exploring and collecting caves. And he felt very clearly that he was trying to give a contribute to the new science information. And so it was important also to promote the knowledge and its diffusion. Thank you very much. Sorry for being a bit late.
Good. Well, we have time for a few questions. Yes? Okay.
Silvia Figueiredo from Brazil, University of Campinas. Thank you, Kathleen and Ezio. I have two short questions. He was working in the very beginning of Italy, unified Italy. So my two questions are, first, were there any connections with this nationalism or national identity in this new unified country with this old human remains in his research? And how did was it received in a very Catholic country? and to learn about this old specimens of humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, very much. The first question is, I would say, quite easy to answer. The second is more complicated. It's a very good question, on the other hand, because the debate on Catholicism and science in these years has been recently finally studied with more attention, and not only on the figure of Stoppani, who was a priest, but he was also the first professor of geology in Italy at the end of the day. 1862, he made the first course in Pavia, even if he was not yet an official established professor, but anyway, he was a priest. And in fact, he didn't like very much all these new trend that they were coming, of course, in France. There were lots of connection with France, with geology, France geology, and France new disciplines of palaeontology and so. So certainly Issel was part, together with his colleagues and friends of the Alpine Club, because they were mainly geologists and mineralogists and some physicians. They were part of this national feeling of being a new community, of a new nation, because it was a real new nation from several states scattered with different language and different tradition. Now you have a united country. And the Alpine Club certainly were part of this, because they were immediately after the unification, because the congresses of the Italian scientists started much earlier, in the 30s of the 19th century, but they were still creating the community of scientists, the République des Lettres, no? République des Sciences in Italy. So he was part of that, certainly. He had this feeling, and also the fact that he wanted to promote this series of congresses starting from Italy, then went to France. And concerning the reaction of the Catholics, yeah, I can see a series of difficult reactions in the medium level of the society, where these priest scientists were not all so advanced like Stoppani, who was trying to create what he called the concordismo, so the tried agreement between the new science, spectacular geology, and religion. But then this trend will improve in the 20th century. We will have more of this collaboration.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. I have a question about this, interrelationship between amateurs and scientists. I only know, this side from the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, where, in my opinion, there you can't see such a difference. So it appears very, very late in the 1880s, 1890s. Before it was, the people just went into the cave and did everything. They did digging, excavation, they did geology, they did paleontological stuff, prehistoric excavation. So it was it was not disciplinary. It was before disciplines such emerged. Yeah, yes. Yeah, and in the Habsburg monarchy, this boundary work came up with prehistory in the 1890s. Especially with a case in Trieste. There was this a local hero, it's Karl Ludwig Moser, and he digged a lot, but he was German, and he was attacked by the Italian people who worked there in this scientific community, and there was a lot of rivalry. And then there was this one guy in Vienna, he got the first chair of prehistory, a young guy, and he attacked Moser very, very, very harshly. And there was a lot of competition. What was the situation in Italy? You described this more as a form of collaboration. In Austria, it was also collaboration, but then after the 1890s, with these instructions, which came up, really the people were tried to get control, discipline. They should bring everything to the specialist in the museum. What about this? What about Italy? Thank you.
In the case of Issel was one involved very much within the council in Genoa. He was involved with the military in giving them instructions, also for bringing back specimens. He was involved in the council of Genoa, one for protection and conservation. He was a commissioner for documenting caves. and he was commissioner for documenting copper mines. So he had two public positions. He had his position as a professor of geology, but he also had his position involved with the popular science, the local societies. So I think he has a foot in many camps, and he is considered as a reference figure by the council, and I think also nationally through the Geographical Society and through the Alpine Club, where his opinion was respected. And I think that from this point of view, he balanced this rivalry or competition between different ranks.
Yes, he managed well this. And also, I just came to my mind when she was mentioning the mining this morning. There was a question about mining. There was a question about mining involved in the preparation as a place as a knowledge to add to this search on caves. And he, in the Liguria Prehistorica e Geologica, dedicated the first book to geology, part of the second book to mining, and then goes to the caves. So there is this passage also. And he used, of course, towards mining, an interest in miners, in all the people who are, he was able to make a network with the people he contacted for his collaboration.
There is also, he instituted this course from the university for teaching teachers. And I think this was maybe also an attempt by him to make a balance between the public, those involved in science, and those involved in teaching, to bring an awareness. And I think he was very highly respected within the Genovese society for this.
We have just one very quick question.
One quick, okay. Marianne Clemon, Vienna. Are there more societies concerning alpine studies? Because in the monarchy you have a association and you have a club, and that makes the difference. But it doesn't mean that the scientists are in the club. This is a question, a social question. So I agree with you, but this is very interesting how this works. And the other question would be, this is, I don't know, I'm curious about, was he engaged to establish the chair for prehistory? Because this is a very important point. We speak about the discipline, we speak about this first steps, but it took a long time that you got the chair at the university. It's like with geology. We have geology since the 18th century, but the chairs are later. So sorry, it's not short.
So two quick answers then.
Raphael, can you answer about the chair?
His son was the first chair in Genoa, Arturo Issel. The actual title of the chair, I don't remember now, Marianne, but he was the first chair, I think, in archaeology in the University of Genoa. I don't know.
Certainly, they were already late in establishing. We were already late in establishing geology chairs, because in this late 60s, 70s. Yes, this is certainly a question. Probably also was related to this fact of creating a new network within the national universities now, and not more universities of the status of the single states, not like they were before. Very interesting. I agree with you with the difference between societies and clubs interested in mountain. The Alpine Club in Italy followed the model of the previous Alpine Club founded in Europe, no? But immediately captured a good amount of scientists in its membership, and very little. It was quite an elitarian let's say, group of people. But they were scientists or nobles or middle class going up in a new government and so on. But there were not other societies like you had in Austria, sort of groups interested in mountains. Then the Alpine Club developed in different ways. It changed very quickly. It even changed its statutes, its bylaws, and took away the word science from the first paragraph of the bylaws. But it stayed. Then other societies like Alpine Club, for example, in Trento, the SAT, in Friuli, in other area, emerged, but still club and not association. So that's a difference, and we should compare this area.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kathleen and Ezio. That was really a fascinating talk and matched